Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Betsy Kenyon, and I am the marketing coordinator here at Elevate Wealth Advisory. Looks like we have a lot of brand new faces, so I'm going to give you a quick introduction to our firm. We're a full-service wealth advising firm based in Athens, Georgia, and we were founded over 40 years ago as Vickery Financial Services by Chuck Vickery. Since that time, our team has grown to 11 people, and we are now led by our president and CEO, Deanne Rosso, and we rebranded several years ago as Elevate Wealth Advisory. So today I'm really excited to introduce you to Neel Shah. He is an estate planning attorney and a wealth advisor with Shah Total Plan. One thing we do here at Elevate is we sit down with our clients and help them review their total life plan, all their goals, and how they plan to fund those goals. And for our clients, that's not just what you want to do when you retire, but also what you want to see happen after you pass away. How do you want to leave a legacy, either to your kids or philanthropically? And so Neel is here today to help us understand the best ways to go about getting that plan in place. I also would love to introduce you to our advanced planning coordinator, Dee Dee Bloom. Dee Dee's been with us for 8 years, and in her role, she's not only a wealth advisor, but she's our coordinator of advanced planning. And so she sits down with our clients and she does look ahead to not just what you would like to see happen as you age, but also what you would like to see happen after you pass away. So before we begin our discussion, I wanted to let everybody know about a few housekeeping items. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box and then also a chat box. So if you have any questions throughout today's presentation, be sure to put your question in either of those two places. And we'll go ahead and take all of our questions at the end of the presentation after Dee Dee talks with us. So now I'm going to let Neel take it away. Thank you so much for being here, Neel.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. So we get to talk about estate planning, which is everybody's fun topic, right? On a summer afternoon, why not? One of the things that I like to level set when we get into this sort of estate planning conversation is what's an estate? Like you'll hear often people say, well, I don't need an estate plan, Neel. I just need a will. Or what's a trust? I really want a trust, but I want it in my estate. Or I don't need estate planning. I just really want to make sure my beneficiaries are updated. So I feel like level setting and making sure that we're all talking about the exact same thing is probably somewhat important, right? When people hear estates, they think of like these Doberman pinchers guarding like a fence in front of a mansion, and maybe a couple of Rolls Royces, and this backset mansion with fountains and pools and stuff like that. Or you hear estate, you think rich, you think super wealthy, you think hard to reach. Yeah, I get why we would think that. But if you imagine you've got things like checking accounts, savings accounts, your real estate, your retirement accounts, maybe you've got an investment home or a second home or a vacation home, all these things are your assets. So when you think of all these things as your assets, when you pass away, that is your estate. So what's an estate plan? It's just a plan. It's a plan that dictates how the stuff that you have is going to get to the next of kin. Now, it accomplishes a bunch of other things too, and we're going to talk about all of this. And we're going to go through it somewhat high level, but I've got no PowerPoint. I'm going to be using a whiteboard. It's going to be stick figures. It's going to be smiley faces and sad faces. It's going to be lines. And this is year 23 of me doing this, and my artwork has not gotten any better. So please don't judge me on my artwork. But effectively, that's what an estate plan is. It's a plan that says, look, when I'm no longer here, this is what's going to happen to my stuff. When I'm disabled, incapacitated, this is what's going to happen to my stuff. This is who I want to have in control. Now, I believe in two things. And I'm not a super religious person, but I consider myself a fairly spiritual person. And I do believe that at some point, and if you've had to deal with this with a family member, at some point, we're all going to breathe our last breath, right? Studies show that 100% of us are going to pass away at some point. I haven't done any independent research into that, but pretty sure that's accurate. When we're ready to breathe our last breath, I do like to believe that our life flashes before our eyes and we reflect on the things that matter to us most. What I don't want, as that number one thing that I believe in, is that for anybody that we work with, or really anybody for that matter, looks back on what happened during your life when you're reflecting and feeling any sort of modicum of regret over things that are not sort of lived powerfully. You didn't get to live the life that you want to live. No regrets. And this is where the folks at Elevate and Deanne help you, making sure that you are living the life that you want to live, a life intentionally, a life of purpose. And money doesn't stop you from doing what you wanted to do during your lifetime. So that's the first part. The second part is after you've had your last breath and the family is sitting around a dining table back at your home or around the coffee table, and they're reflecting on the legacy that you left behind, it should be one of pride. I want them to be proud of your legacy. I want them to be proud of my legacy. And that happens with sound planning. And those are the two things. And that's where the legacy planning, the wills, the trust, the estate planning we're about to talk about really comes in. So I feel like it's always important to start with the why. This is very much the why. So with an estate plan, what are components of an estate plan? Well, yeah, I mean, some people will think of trusts, some people will think of wills, but there's some really basic things that constitute estate plans. When you think of how things get passed down from one person to another, everything falls into one of three categories. You ready? Everything really falls into one of these three categories when it comes down to how things pass down from one person to the next. The first is titling. If my wife and I own our house together and one of us passes away, the other person doesn't have to go through any hoops. They don't have to go through this probate process or any legal processes for the other person to become the owner because we were both on title. And we were both on title basically means I pass away, she becomes the only owner. That could be the case with our checking accounts and our savings accounts or any other financial accounts as well, too, if we held it in the proper way. That's titling. Now, that might not be the best thing because if my mother added me to her home and didn't add my sister to her home, and God forbid my mother were to pass, and we titled it in such that I become the automatic owner, do I have to give my sister any portion of that home? And the answer is no. So titling is a part of your estate plan. It may not be the only thing that you want to do. If you're looking for the estate plan that fell off the back of the truck, you know, there are people who will do this in sort of a just Band-Aid approach, but it's not a comprehensive plan. It's got to be a part of your plan. So the first way that things get passed down is by titling. The second way that things get passed down is by beneficiary designations or by contract. So for this, we're looking at things like annuities, life insurance policies, 401ks, IRAs. When you list a beneficiary on those accounts, it doesn't matter what's in your will. It doesn't matter what's in your trust. And whoever you listed as that beneficiary is going to ultimately get it. So the example that I give, and my wife hates this, and you'll understand why, is if I said in my will or in my trust that when I pass away, everything goes to my wife, but my life insurance policy goes to my girlfriend, that life insurance policy will go to my girlfriend. Now, my wife would probably find a way to bring me back to life and then kill me again. But effectively, that contract provision, it governs and it will override anything that I have in my will or my trust. So the beneficiary designations are important and often overlooked. Some people will actually list the wrong people. Some people will list just one child, thinking that one child will give everything to the other kids. Some people will list a child that may have special needs. There's so many potential pitfalls, but it's a very important part of the plan. That's the second way. The first way is by title. The second way is by contract. And the third way is by your legal instruments, which is going to be either a will and or a trust. And if you have not left one of those behind, then don't worry about it. The government gives you one for free. That's me being facetious. The government does give you one for free. It's called your state's probate code. I live in New Jersey. My office is situated in New Jersey. We, as a law firm, represent folks in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, DC, and we're pending in South Dakota right now. But pretty much every state in the country has a probate code. And what that means is it's not like if I passed away without a will, the government gets everything. A lot of people think that that's not actually the case. The government doesn't just automatically get everything. There are laws, there are rules that dictate who's going to get stuff. And whether you're in a blended family, and if you have children from outside the marriage, or if you're married, if you're not married, if you're single, if you're a partner, all these sort of things are usually covered. It may not be the outcome that you want, which is why we usually recommend having things sort of squared away on your own. So if you'll bear with me for a second, I'm going to share my screen. And this is where we all collectively hold our breath. And we hope that the technology that we tested multiple times actually works when we want it to work. So I am going to share my whiteboard screen in 3, 2, 1. All right, ta-da. So hopefully everybody's seeing my whiteboard screen. If it's not, then please Betsy or anybody else on Team Elevate, let me know that it's
We
not.
can see it perfectly. Thank you.
Hallelujah. It's going to be a good day. All right, fantastic. So let's start talking about what an estate plan could accomplish and what it could look like. So I'm going to use myself as an example. Many of us just met, and I feel bad talking about anybody's demise until I get to know them at least for the third meeting. I think it's the third meeting when you're allowed to start talking about people's demises, but certainly not before that. So my name, as you guys have gotten to know, is Neel. My wife's name is Pinky. Yes, that's her real legal name. I've got a daughter named Anya, who is 18, and a son named Jaden, who is 17. If you follow your typical sort of Ozzie and Harriet type estate plan here, what a lot of folks are going to say is Neel passes away, everything goes to Pinky. Pinky passes away, everything goes to Neel. And if something happens to both of us, things go equally to the two kids. Pretty typical estate plan. Pinky and I were never married before. The children that we have are both our joint children. We probably don't even need a will to accomplish this. But you still want to have one because you want to have that legal instrument, not rely on the law, and if the law changes. If this is all we wanted, I will tell people sort of tongue in cheek, yeah, maybe the government plan is fine for you. I don't really feel that way, but this is generally going to be that default plan. Now, is this really what we want? Maybe, maybe not. Because when I drill deeper and I ask families what they're really looking for, is they're going to say, look, Neel, or I want to leave these assets to my spouse. But those of you who have met my wife know that clearly if I married up, and if I weren't here, she'd probably be able to find somebody better. And if she did wind up receiving my total estate or our total estate, and then she did wind up remarrying somebody else, person X, let's call him Brad Pitt, for lack of a better term. If she did wind up marrying Brad Pitt, I think lately it's Bradley Cooper, actually, but one of the Brads. If she wound up marrying one of the Brads, and then the Brad basically decided that he wanted to leave the marriage, and he wanted to take the assets that came out of here in a divorce, or some portion of it, those assets could be at risk. So that might not be the only outcome that we're looking for. Flip the script a little bit, and let's just say that things don't work out and she's really grief-stricken by my loss, and the Brads just aren't going to cut it for her. She passes away, and now assets go to my kids. Once the kids receive the assets, it's theirs. It belongs to them. So what's the problem? Well, I mentioned my daughter's 18. My son is 17. Neither of them are married right now. But I've already decided that my son-in-law is an idiot. I don't know who he is. But I just know that whoever it is, nobody's good enough to marry my daughter, right? So he's got to be an idiot. So what if I don't want the idiot to receive any portion of my money? What if I want to make sure that when she receives her assets, it's in a vault with a lid on top of it? Therefore, it's protected. But at the same time, I want this vault to have this spigot that could be turned on and off for Anya. And if God forbid Anya's not here, then it'll be there for the benefit of my grandchildren, my bloodline. And if I don't have children, then I want to make sure it goes into my son's bucket. And I want to make sure that it's protected against things like divorces and lawsuits and creditor claims. If they started businesses and gave personal guarantees, I want to make sure it's protected and it stays for the benefit of him. And again, my grandchildren, and so on and so forth. If this is the kind of plan that I want, this is definitely not what your state's going to provide. Because effectively what your state's going to provide is it goes to them, it's theirs, it's in their account. They can do whatever they want to do with it, but it also means that it's exposed. Now, who's in charge of this bucket? Who gets to turn this spigot on and off? Well, that's up to me to decide when I do this planning. This is going to be the person that I appoint as a trustee after I pass away. And it can be, for example, my sister, who's going to be the co-trustee. And I might decide that at a certain age, I want Anya to be a trustee of her own trust. Say 25, she can be a co-trustee with her aunt. And maybe at 35, we could let her be her sole trustee. So what I'm describing here so far, everything that you're seeing below this line right here, this is all happening after both Pinky and I have both passed away. None of this is happening during my lifetime. All I've done is left really good instructions. So most people will hear this and say, hey, this makes a lot of sense. I want this. I want to make sure the stuff that I've worked for all my life does go to my bloodline. It stays within for my children, my grandchildren, or my charitable causes that I care for, or my partner, or anybody else that I really care for, but I want to dictate what happens. So once you come to that basic conclusion that this is the kind of planning that you want to do, now you find yourself at a fork in the road. Now, if you've ever been hiking You know that you'll park your car at one of these places, these trail maps that you can kind of go up and down. And the trail map basically says, look, you can go up this way, but you're going to come down a different way. But either way, you wind up at the same destination. You will wind up at the same ultimate endpoint. What I'm describing right here, this is the endpoint. This is the destination. But you are at a fork in the road, and you've got two different paths that you can choose that's going to get you to this place. Neither is right, neither is wrong. I'm going to say it again. Neither is right, neither is wrong. Either way, the end destination is the same. Some hiking paths are more difficult than others are, and you're going to decide whether you want to do more work now or more work later. My favorite analogy when I explain this is think about somebody who wants to bake a cake. Okay, so if we're going to bake a cake, we got two options. I could just ask you for a recipe and say, okay, you know what, friend, just give me a recipe right now, and I'll make sure that I bake the cake later. A will is like a recipe. I'm the one, if you give me the recipe, when I'm ready to bake the cake, I got to go to this ShopRites up here. I don't know what there is down there in South Carolina, but we have ShopRites up here. Maybe it's Fairway. I don't know. I forgot. But I'm going to buy the eggs. I'm going to buy the sugar. I'm going to buy the batter. I don't bake, obviously. You could probably tell based on this analogy breaking down. But I'm going to be the one who buys all the stuff. I'm going to come home. I'm going to mix it all together, and I'm going to stick it in the oven. I'm going to stick a fork in it, make sure it's ready. If it's not ready, I'm going to put it right back in. A will is requiring somebody else to do the baking, but it can be a very good recipe. And effectively, this is the stuff that they're going to be baking after you pass away. They're the ones who are charged. They're going to execute on your wishes. So an executor is going to execute on your wishes under the will, and they're the ones who will be doing a lot of the legwork. They'll be the ones who will gather your deeds and your checking account information, your brokerage account information, your retirement account information, working with the folks at Elevate. They're going to be the ones who are going to be gathering all of these assets together. Now, what's wrong with that? Nothing's wrong with that. As long as you follow the recipe properly, you're going to get the desired outcome. So the first fork in the road, or the first option in this choose your own adventure estate plan, is your wills-based plan. Many of our clients choose wills-based plans. Effectively, what you're saying is, here is the recipe. Now, what others will choose, and no judgment here, but what others will choose is, you know what, Neel, I'd rather do more work right now. I know where my stuff is. I know what my desired outcome is. I know where my assets are. I know the relationships between my siblings, between my kids as siblings. I want to make sure that I do as much as possible to make it as easy for them as possible. That requires you to do more heavy lifting. I would rather bake the cake today so that somebody else can basically just step right in and enjoy the cake, whatever's left when I pass away. And what we're talking about here is creating an open bucket, if we will. So this is not like the same one I have for my kids. During our lifetime, we're going to create this open bucket right now, and we're going to have it in a way so that we can put things in and take things out without any restrictions whatsoever. You know, if you could see the little screen where I am right now, imagine this mug right here. And I'm actually putting my checking account, savings account, brokerage account, home, vacation home, making this the beneficiary of my retirement accounts, making this the beneficiary of my life insurance accounts. And when I've passed away, what's going to happen is everything privately is going to just pour into these two vehicles. This blue vehicle that I'm talking about, the other option, is a trust. And the reason people will create a trust is to say, look, this is a labor of love. I'm going to do more work now. So the transition, the ease of transfer of assets is going to be much easier on the next of kin. I'm going to make it less labor intensive for them when I've passed away for assets to pass over. And because this vehicle right here is open, we can put things in and we can take things out. It's a revocable trust. Yes, this is my real handwriting. And again, because we're doing it during our lifetime, it is a revocable living trust. Now, this is where that fork in the road kind of comes in. Revocable trust versus will-based plan is something you usually decide at the onset when you're ready to do this planning. Do I want to do more work today? Or would I rather leave a recipe or instructions for somebody else to follow later? Neither's right, neither's wrong. As long as everything's done properly, this is what's going to happen. The process, the baking, is called probate. Probate means taking that original will to your county court, letting the county clerk or the surrogate's court or the, there's a different names for it in different chancery division, different names in different courts. They bless the will and say, okay, executor, go ahead and do what you got to do. That's what happens under a will-based plan. Under a trust-based plan, stuff's already in here. When Pinky and I have passed away, stuff is still in here. this thing didn't die with us. So this can now easily transfer the assets next to the next of kin. And then if she and I were incapacitated, unable to manage our own affairs, we would just have a backup person. Could be my daughter and my son if I think they're ready. It could be my sister. It could be my father-in-law, whoever I decide is going to be our backup trustees there. So that's sort of the foundational part of the difference between a will and a trust. And this is where the asset protection for the next of kin and the next generation comes in. Now, a lot of people will say, well, okay, I get the will, I get the trust part of it. What about these other documents that kind of get into play? Every estate plan should have a certain amount of components, so certain components, I should say, associated with it. And I like to think of the timelines of when each of these documents come in as sort of a guideline as to which documents you should have. So right now, hopefully everybody on this meeting is happy and healthy. What ultimately happens for many of us is we come to a point in our life when we become incapacitated, meaning we can't manage our own financial affairs, we can't manage our own healthcare affairs. And like I said, again, I haven't done the research on this, but independent studies show that 100% of us are going to pass away at some point. When you think of the timeline of these documents, we talked about a will that needs to be probated. That only kicks into effect when we pass away, right? Those of you who have wills, they're probably sitting somewhere in a file cabinet or a safe deposit box or somewhere. You haven't had to do anything with it. The will has no power. It has no effect until you pass away and it gets submitted for probate. So it only kicks into effect after we kick the bucket. When you think of a trust, it starts now. I'll stick with the revocable trust right now. It starts now. It continues if you become incapacitated. And then it also continues after you pass away. So a trust covers that entire timeline. But a trust only governs the stuff that's actually in the trust itself, the home, the stuff that we actually put in there. What about dealing with pensions? What about dealing with IRAs that don't go into trust during your lifetime? What about dealing with Social Security? What about dealing with the IRS? So for that reason, we have a set of documents that will sometimes kick in when we're healthy, definitely kick in when we're incapacitated, and will go until the moment we actually pass away. For finances, we're talking about a durable power of attorney for your finances. This is the kind of type of document that's going to say, look, if I become incapacitated, the stuff that's not in the trust, if I have a trust, I still want to have my spouse, my kids, my agent to be the one who can actually kick into action if necessary. This is just for finances. And then we have a set of documents that I call the healthcare cluster. And the healthcare cluster is a healthcare power of attorney. Who makes my healthcare decisions if I'm unable to? We have a HIPAA authorization, which is who has access to my private information and dealing with the insurance companies, dealing with my healthcare service providers if they're going to be the ones making the healthcare decisions. And for those of our clients who desire one, we have a living will. And a living will is basically a document that specifies, look, if I'm being kept alive purely by artificial means, if there's no chance of me living a permanent a quality of life and I'm going to be in a permanent vegetative state, I do give the folks under my healthcare power of attorney the authority to stop the treatment if it came down to it. So that's sort of the high level of basically the estate planning process. So I shouldn't say the process, but the documents associated. I believe that every estate plan should at least have, pardon me, didn't mean to delete that, your will, should have at least a will, a living will, a HIPAA authorization, a healthcare power of attorney, or a durable power of attorney. They have different names. Sometimes the documents are consolidated, but it should have all components of that. For those who want to do more of the work up front so that there's less work for those later, or avoid the possibility of disputes and infighting between the siblings or siblings and your spouse or anything like that, I do believe that a trust makes sense. Now, there's other components that are not legal documents. I'm going to touch on those in a second. But this is effectively the entire document set, if you will. Last couple of things that I'll talk about, and then we'll just open it up to questions, is taxes is a question that comes up often. How do the taxes work? Well, the estate tax exemption is right now, and it's about to change in about a year and a half if the law stays the same. Right now, Neel and Pinky, as U.S. citizen spouses, are each allowed to die with about $12.9 million each. So a total of, say, just under $26 million. So you're each allowed to die with about $12.9 million. When the kids inherited, anything over that threshold would be subject to a 40% tax. Now, in 2025, that law is scheduled to sunset. And instead of 12.9 million, that amount's scheduled to go down to say about 6 million. Your individual state may have a state estate tax as well. I know that most of America doesn't fall under that plan, but it is something you want to know about and you want to keep an eye on it. It does include things like your foreign assets, if you have any, checking accounts, savings accounts, brokerage accounts, obviously. Life insurance policies, if you own them individually, are part of your taxable estate. So those are all sort of the things you want to consider. Business interests, absolutely. Real estate, for sure. Pretty much anything that you own is going to be part of your taxable estate when you pass away. There's a sneaky tax, which you should definitely be speaking with Deanne and the folks at Elevate about, which is what happens with your IRAs when you pass away. Although this isn't an estate tax, they did amend the rules recently so that when the next generation inherits these IRAs, they will have to take all of the income out, or take all of the, empty out the accounts within 10 years and pay all the taxes on any traditional IRAs or 401k accounts, which could have a tax impact if they're in a higher tax bracket. So that's not an estate tax, but it's definitely a tax you want to be mindful of if somebody were to pass away. And then there's some capital gains tax components too. Like, do you have things that are, I had a family that owned a property in Brooklyn, bought it for about $25,000, was worth about $3 million when mom passed away. They got to step up in cost basis, a little beyond the scope of our conversation, but definitely worth speaking with the folks at Elevate to see which taxes might hit. The estate tax doesn't apply to a lot of families. So, but it's the one that people like to talk about. What people don't necessarily ask about, which I think they're missing the boat on, is how do we pay for our long-term care before we pass away? So when Neil and Pinky get sick here, is there going to be anything left if we're spending all this stuff on nursing home costs or in-home costs as we get later in life? And that's when we start talking about things like irrevocable trusts, long-term care planning, Medicaid planning. What is the right way to pay for that long-term care we needed? Because although the estate tax may not apply to you, paying for a nursing home somewhere between, I don't know, $9,000 to $15,000 a month, depending on where you are, that's going to suck up your cash pretty quickly. So this estate planning conversation is a fantastic opportunity to have that estate planning conversation. Now, last thing that I'll talk about before we kind of just open it up to questions is, how do you get this stuff done? How do you get started? Now, this is not the only way to get things started, but what you're looking at right now on the screen is our process. And I'm just going to walk you through it. Again, I obviously think it's the best one, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it this way. But your process with your attorney or whoever you work with doesn't have to have this particular order, but I do believe it should have all these components. The first is education. There's got to be a way for you to have a conversation, or maybe you have a website, maybe there's videos, but some way to get educated on exactly what it is we're going to be doing. What are our options? Maybe a trust is not a good option for you. We've had clients with over $20 million in assets that didn't really need a trust because of the way their assets were actually held. And we've had people with far, far, far less who needed a trust because they knew that their kids were going to fight after they passed away. So the education session is huge, in my opinion. And I'm going to say right after the education session, you go into this wealth planning session. This is a very academic conversation. When you get into the wealth planning conversation, this is more of a, hey, this is what you have. This is what actually fits you. So it's a much more bespoke, much more customized conversation. Once you decide which way you're going to go, will, trust, irrevocable trust, comprehensive wills, then generally you want to get into a design meeting. And the design meeting is, who's going to be my trustees? Who'll be my executors? Who'll be my guardian for my minor children? Who's going to... And who'll step into action? And what age do we want the kids to have control, if ever? Do we ever want them to have control? Are we worried about substance abuse issues? So the design session is, I don't know if you guys drink wine or scotch or beer, whatever you drink, you want to keep a little bit of it handy right after this one, because this one will wear you out. It is an exhausting conversation, but it's a very necessary conversation. This becomes the blueprint for the plan. After the blueprint is done, this is the way we do it. We take 3 to 4 weeks, summer months a little bit longer, to get documents ready, and then we get into a signing ceremony. There's no trumpets or elephants or balloons, unfortunately. We decided not to do that anymore. But no, there were never any of those. But the signing ceremony is a ceremony. We want to make sure we sign the documents. They are valid, legal, enforceable documents the minute they sign them. Now we have this fantastic plan. We built this fantastic home off of the blueprint that we created, but all your furniture is on the front lawn. And I do believe this is where Team Elevate can probably help you most, is help with the asset alignment. This is where our stuff is. How do we get our checking accounts, brokerage accounts, IRAs, home, our business interests? How do we get it all integrated with the plan that we have? You align your assets. You can use a tool like Everplans. You could use a tool like whatever the tools that that your wealth manager has, or you could do something on your own. But this is sort of an opportunity to make sure the stuff that you have integrates. Remember at the beginning, I talked about titling. I talked about beneficiary designations. Those are crucial to make sure that you have it titled properly. Otherwise, it may not have the desired outcome. And then finally, you're doing this plan for who? You're not doing it for yourself, because you're probably not going to be here when the plan actually gets implemented. That's why you're doing the plan in the first place. So the irony of this entire planning, and I'll close on this, but the irony of this entire planning is that people will do it. They'll spend weeks, months, thousands of dollars in some cases doing this sort of planning, and then it'll just sit on a shelf and nobody ever talks about it. So the people who are going to be impacted by it are not in the know. They're still scrambling. So what I usually recommend, and this is not a legal requirement, but it's more of a strong recommendation, is this legacy meeting. It's usually either a Zoom meeting or an in-person meeting where we get the adult children involved. Or if you have parents who are going to be your guardians or siblings, high level meeting. Don't talk about the assets necessarily, but just high level saying, you know what, we do have a trust. And you might be, didn't mean to erase your trust there. We do have a trust, and the trustee is going to be you. And we might change this at any point. And we do want the kids to know that we have these documents in place. And Billy, we chose your sister Susie because she's a nurse. It made sense to have her as the healthcare power of attorney. And Susie, we chose Billy as the financial agent because he's always the one who manages the finances. So have these conversations now and preempt any disputes or any hard feelings before anything happens. So this is our comprehensive process. It's not the only one out there. It's just the one that's worked for us over the last 20 years. It's just evolved over time. So with that said, I will end my monologue. But I think we have, oh, there's Betsy. Yeah, Betsy,
Hey.
I'll kick it back over to you. Hopefully that was on time.
That was wonderful and so thorough. And of course, lots of humor in there too, which I think when you're talking about things like this is super appreciated. So thank you very much. We do have some questions. And before I read those out to you, I'm going to introduce Dee Dee Bloom. And she is on our team at Elevate. She's our advanced planning coordinator. And Dee Dee's going to talk a little bit about a service we just started offering to our clients. It's called Everplans, and it's simply a way for you to organize and securely store all your important documents, your wishes, your memories in one place. So I'm going to let Dee Dee talk to you about this for a minute. In the meantime, everybody, if you have some questions for Neel or Dee Dee, just put them in the Q&A box or the chat box, and we'll make sure we answer those in just a few minutes. Go ahead, Dee Dee, you can share your screen.
Thanks, Betsy. So we just wanted to help with the facilitation of all these documents and everything that Neel talked about, and he did so well explaining how important they are. But we would like to offer to our clients a storage facility, I guess you could say, for all of these documents so that the person who's going to be implementing these things in the future has access to them, and you've explained it to them and they have a full understanding of what your plan is. So let me just share my screen and I can give you a little description of what Everplans is. Hold on one second. So this is just a quick video that kind of just gives a summary of what Everplans is and how it can help you.
Our lives are made up of so many things. Days are filled with family, friends, work, daily tasks, obligations, and paperwork. Life is complicated. We do so much to take care of our families, try to get all the right things in place for them. We want them to be okay, no matter what. It's hard to stay on top of it all, and especially hard to keep everything organized. Everplans is here to help you. We're a secure and simple way to gather and store all of the most important things you need and your family really needs to know about. Everplans helps you identify and add important items like your most relevant financial information, like vital legal documents you've created, such as your will or power of attorney, as well as things that might never have occurred to you, such as the password for your password manager, how you pay your bills, the code for your phone, and the stories behind cherished family heirlooms. Even house stuff, like how the brand new thermostat works. Our mission is to get you organized and provide your family peace of mind. By offering guidance, the Everplans platform helps identify any gaps you have in your planning or questions you may have in general and works towards a solution. Since sharing is a major part of the platform, you'll have the opportunity to choose Everplans deputies, These are trusted family members, advisors, attorneys, or close friends that only you can get permission to access your plan. If anything were to happen to you, your Ever plan is in place, ensuring everything is easily accessible for your family when they need it most. Our goal is to provide peace of mind throughout all aspects of your life, for you and your family. Get started now.
Okay. So really, that's just basically just a summary of what we have to offer people so that they can organize their thoughts and their plans and their future. And it's one place that we can all be on the same page with your family and your intended people down the road that need to know this information. So with that said, I know that's a lot of information and I know there's a lot of questions. So I'll turn it over to Betsy to facilitate those questions.
Thank you so much, Dee Dee. That's certainly something I'm going to look into for my own family right away. So we do have several questions. The first, Neel, is could you talk a little bit more about the step up in basis you had mentioned during the real estate part of the talk?
No. Stop kidding. Yeah, it's a little bit intense. So I'll try to give it like a high level bit, because I think as we go deeper down this rabbit hole, it could blow up pretty quickly. But here's the best example. If I were Jeff Bezos, because I've been told that there might be a slight resemblance, I think it's the hairdo, right? But if I were Jeff Bezos and say I started Amazon and I had 100 shares of Amazon stock and I started up. So my cost basis is zero. I didn't pay anything for it. And if I sold it today, and let's just say it's selling for $300 a piece, I have to pay capital gains on that $300. It's all gain for me. So I've got to pay capital gains tax on that $300. Let's just say I died owning that stock, and then my kids inherited it. When they inherit it with a new cost basis of $300. It stepped up to $300. So they sell that stock now for $310. They only pay taxes on that $10 gain itself. It stepped up and to $300, and the gain was $10. So when you have assets that have appreciated during my lifetime, Jeff's lifetime, during his lifetime, when he passes away, that becomes a new cost basis. Sometimes there's a benefit to holding on to that until you die, instead of moving it into the wrong kind of trust where you don't get the step up, or gifting it to my kids right now during my lifetime. They would get a transfer of cost basis. If I gifted it during my lifetime, the kids' cost basis would still be that $0. They sell it after I die for $310. They got to pay tax on the full $310. So that's the step up. It applies to real estate. It applies to stock, as I just described, any asset, really. So anytime you're thinking about gifting an asset, or anytime you're thinking about putting things into an irrevocable, we didn't talk about irrevocable trust today because I think it's a separate topic, but if you gift it away and it's off your balance sheet, you want to know what your cost basis is and what you're giving up as a result of that. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you so much.
You got it.
So we've heard a lot about the death tax. You'd mentioned different tax brackets that might be going lower with the federal government upon death. This person says, I have children who live in 5 different states, and some states have higher tax rates than others. Does using a trust help protect against state taxes?
The revocable trust that we've been speaking about, probably not. So interesting thing about this, there's actually no such thing as death taxes. They did some market research in the 80s, and they decided, when I say they, I mean proponents of an estate tax, decided that using the term death taxes would hit a nerve for people who were opposed to it. So they started using the term death taxes, but there's really no such thing as a death tax. It's either an inheritance tax or an estate tax. Estate tax is the person who died, and this is me answering the question directly. If you died as a resident of a state that has a tax associated with it, your estate will pay an estate tax. If that person inheriting lives in a state that's subjecting the inheritance to an inheritance tax, there might be an inheritance tax, or it might be based on the state where the decedent died as well, too. There are some instances where a trust may help with inheritance tax, but it's very state specific. And yeah, I'll leave it at it's very state specific. And I'll say also that there's certain assets, like, for example, in New Jersey, we do have an inheritance tax, but life insurance is not subject to an inheritance tax. It's got a special, unique exception. So if you're leaving assets to people that might be subject to an inheritance tax, you might want to identify the vehicle that you use and the asset that you're going to use.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
When is the best time to begin talking with your adult children about your estate plans?
without hyperbole or without exaggeration, yesterday. There's no bad time to do it. And it could be, look, every family dynamic is a little bit different. And, every child is different. Every parent is different. Some people can absorb these topics. And I'll just say my rule of thumb, you heard me trying to inject humor in there. I'm naturally sort of a playful, joyful type of person. I like to take things lightly. I'd rather have these conversations when I can laugh about it. So that's really important. I had a grandmother and a grandfather. We were blessed to have them until 91 and 90. They both died within 14 months of each other over the past 24 months. And, we had some conversations, but I still, being in the profession, regret not having more conversations with them too. So when you can laugh about it, it's always better. Every time along the timeline that you kind of give up, you're increasing the likelihood that you're going to have some of these conversations under duress or more stressful situations. And usually good things don't come out of that. So it's always better to have the conversation sooner. My kids, fortunately or unfortunately, kind of grew up around this, but with 18 and 17, my daughter turns 19 in a couple of weeks. I'm going to have these conversations with them early and often. And it could be just things like, look, if I'm sick, this is what I want you to have, what I have happen. I've asked my mother, who's I think 70 almost. I should know her exact age. She'll be 70 next year. But I'll ask my mom, like, look, what do you want to have happen? Because we just went through this with my grandparents. Like, what do you want to have happen when you're sick? And it's just me and my sister, but what do you want to have happen with your grandchildren? So it's never a bad time to have these conversations. It's only sooner the better. And when you can laugh about it is my ideal time.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Our last question, I think we answered it, is how does a child avoid paying taxes on an amount of money that was willed to them by a parent? So I think
we talked about it. Just I think having, Dee Dee talked about ever plans. Obviously, if you've got a wealth manager who's helping you with this, a lot of times wealth managers or your financial planners, people will sort of share bits and pieces of information with the financial planners. But that's usually going to be the first call that people make. It's not the estate planning attorneys, because the estate planning attorneys was a project. You finish your will, you finish your trust, and you're done. So the attorneys don't always have all that information. Yes, they have the legal documents that you need, but they don't have all that financial information. Usually it is the financial planner. Using the tax return is like trying to go on an archaeological dig to find out what happened with a civilization, because that's what happened in the past. So speak with your financial planner, make sure your financial planner at least has information about what they have, even if they're not managing everything, because they're probably going to be the one that has the recurring relationship. They're having proactive conversations. And I do think that, sort of avoiding the tax part of it is related to knowing what it is that might potentially be taxed.
Perfect. And I do have a question from myself. Here at Elevate, we usually refer the estate planning out to local attorneys. And obviously, since you're licensed up in the north, you wouldn't be able to directly help our clients. I know that if they have questions, you're so generous with your time, you'd be more than willing to help them. But when somebody's looking for an estate planning attorney, what are some of the things that they should look for to make sure that they're finding someone that can really help them with this process?
Yeah. So a couple of things that I'll share on that. And I will say this is not a science, it's an art. It's just my personal experience. I do believe you want somebody who does this full time. Meaning, and I have friends who do this, so apologies to my friends who are listening to this too, but if you got somebody who's going to be sort of handling a real estate closing and then a divorce and then do a will when they have some time and then show up at traffic court at night for a speeding ticket, they're probably not doing this with enough regularity to stay on top of the legal changes. So I think that's a big sort of piece to it. You want somebody who's sort of focused on it. I am a member of the Wealth Counsel Network. That's counsel with an E, Wealth Counsel. It's all one word. We tend to be attorneys that are just focused on this area. So I've had a good experience with them too. And then look, if anybody really just needs an attorney referral, I would recommend they reach out to the folks at Elevate or reach out to us if you want, and we can certainly let you know who's in our network.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Neel. And thank you, Dee Dee, for talking about Everplans. If we have anyone with specific questions afterwards, I'll get them in touch with you. And again, I just wanted to thank you so much for your time. I know Deanne looks at you as a very close colleague and friend, and we certainly appreciate your insight today. And thank you so much for all you do for us.
Well, the feeling's mutual. Thanks for having me. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.